Thank you very much. Can everybody hear? Yes. Good. Professor Dr. John Tonkin, Professor Ryugo, Dr. Susan Hepworth, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Tonkin invited me to say a few words at the opening of this Hearing Awareness Week for a number of reasons. One of them, of course, is that at various stages in my life I've had hearing difficulties, and I'll come to that in a moment. But it's also because I was a patient and a friend of his for a number of years. And on top of that, one of the things that I have very happily done since leaving politics, or since politics left me, that's probably a better way of putting it, in 2007, is that I agreed to become the ambassador for the Deafness Forum. It was something that I was invited to do while I was still in office, but felt it invidious to choose one form of charitable activity over another, and I said, come and talk to me when I leave politics, and sure enough they did, and I'm very happy in different ways to talk both about my own experiences and also to promote those who are directly involved in assisting people who have various forms of deafness. It's significant that this is the second occasion in less than a week that I've involved myself in an activity connected to medical science in Australia. We Australians sometimes don't realise how good we are when it comes to medical science. I had the privilege last Tuesday in Brisbane of launching the biography of Professor Ian Fraser, who discovered the vaccine, the Gardasil vaccine, which is proving to be, we all hope and pray, a most effective attack on cervical cancer. And his discovery of the papilloma virus and the subsequent rollout of Gardasil could lead to saving, literally in the years to come, millions of lives. And of course, the progress of responses to hearing loss in Australia is equally illustrious. Let me say that I have been very fortunate, because the hearing loss that I had, it was significantly ameliorated by a series of operations and also by the remarkable hearing aids that are now available. And in case there's anybody in this audience who is reluctant to use a hearing aid, can I please implore you to get over that reluctance? I mean, there's a story quite a number of people have told me in the industry about how there are more hearing aids sitting in drawers than there are in ears. And whenever I get the opportunity, I say how unwise that is. I didn't know I had a hearing loss until I was 9 years of age. I was the youngest of 4 boys. There was a lot of noise in our house, and no doubt if I didn't hear my mother or father, it was probably because they thought I was ignoring them, or there was so much noise from my older brothers that I didn't hear what mum or dad was saying. But on a routine medical inspection of my class at Earlwood Primary School, when I was about 9, that was in 1948, I was born in 1939, I was discovered to have a hearing impairment. The local GP syringed my ears. That sort of worked for a while, but it sort of didn't last, and I just accepted that I couldn't hear as well as everybody else. I occasionally look at old school photographs and I notice that my head is always inclined to the right, and that was because I could hear better out of my left ear than my right ear, a very common response. The hearing problem got a lot worse when I was about 16 or 17, and continued to deteriorate in my first year at university. I then consulted a great ear, nose and throat specialist at the time, George, later Sir George Halliday, who I think from recollection may well have pioneered what is known in the trade as Rosen's operation in this country. He then operated on my right ear in what's called a Stapes mobilisation. See, I've got some of the jargon, but the experts in the audience will no doubt correct it. And that restored some hearing to my right ear. I could never ever get a percentage estimate. In any of the doctors or audiologists I consulted, I would say, what percentage of hearing have I lost? And they would always say, well, it's very, very hard to tell. I think it must be one of those things. I think it's too dangerous for the patient to play around with percentages. But I think before I had this operation, it was well down below 50% overall, because at the age of 19, I wore one of those very old hearing aids where you had it in your ear and then the cord went down and the device was in your top pocket, and whenever you put a jacket on it used to rustle and so on. I abandoned that when I had the operation, because it did restore a significant amount of my hearing. I then had another operation from Sir George early in 1963, and a further advance, a stapedectomy, and there I went, and by the middle 1970s I was in Parliament. People have often said, how on earth did you get by in politics if you couldn't hear properly? And I said, well, some people were kind enough to say that people shouted at each other in politics, and therefore you never had any difficulty in hearing. I did often miss things. I was a lawyer for 12 years before I entered Parliament, and at one point early in my legal career I had harboured an interest in becoming a barrister rather than practising as a solicitor, but I pretty quickly came to the conclusion that with below par hearing it would have been an impossible task, because so much of the work of a barrister, of course, is involved in court and hearing what people say, and to be, for example, an effective cross-examiner, you need to know exactly what your witness has said, particularly a witness on the other side who's unlikely to speak up if he discovers that you can't hear very well, and he's not going to assist your case, and judges on occasions have been known to get irritable with barristers who repeat themselves. So I came to the conclusion that that wasn't for me. I certainly found when I was in Parliament that I missed a lot of interjections just as well. Some of them were very uncomplimentary, and it was quite a good thing that I didn't pick everything up. By 1985, in my first stint as Leader of the Opposition, Sir George Halliday, because of the continuing decline in my hearing, Sir George Halliday recommended that I have a restorative operation on my right ear, so the one that had been operated on 25 years earlier. So I went to see a very talented ear, nose and throat specialist by the name of Dr. Ron Gristerwood in Adelaide, and he performed that operation, and that brought my hearing back somewhat again. And then 10 years later, when I returned to the leadership of the opposition, one of the things that bothered me a bit was that my hearing was continuing to deteriorate, and a good friend of mine who had been president of the Liberal Party in New South Wales spoke to Dr. Tonkin, and he said to my friend John Atwell, he ought to get these new small hearing aids. They're very good. And it's a result of him that I got a small hearing aid for my right ear, which I used continually from about the middle of 1995 through to about 2001, and of course that included 6 years, or the first 5 years that I was Prime Minister. I then got another hearing aid in the left ear, and then as of now and today I wear hearing aids in both ears, and they have given me very useful hearing. And it's in that context that I briefly recounted my own experience. I have been very fortunate And the amount of hearing loss that I've suffered, although it started at an early stage in my life, is so less profound than the tragic experiences of others who are either born without any hearing or who have profound and absolute hearing loss through accident or deterioration or whatever. So that's just a brief outline of my own experience, and I feel it useful in certain environments to talk about it. Not because my story is in any way a hard luck one, it's in fact the complete opposite, because medical science, the skill of Australian surgeons has been, Dr. Tonkin didn't perform an ear operation, but he did perform, I think they call it a septiplasmy, to slightly straighten my nose, which helped in a little way also to boost my hearing, and he did that some 12 years ago. So I've been the fortunate beneficiary of the skill of Australia's and Sydney's best surgeons over a long number of years. Hearing loss is a profound difficulty for many millions of Australians at various stages in their life, and the best and really only thing that I can do in explaining my own circumstances is to illustrate how successful this country has been in responding to it, to encourage anybody who is reluctant to use modern technology, to use hearing aids and the like, to take advantage of them, because they really do make an enormous difference. And modern hearing aids, there's nothing cumbersome about them. They are models of compactness and the like. Of course, when you're a politician and you don't have very good hearing, there are all sorts of jokes said about it, such as, you never listen, and of course you don't hear what we're saying, and don't tell me you're deaf, you just don't want to hear. In my understanding, two of my predecessors as Prime Ministers had varying degrees of hearing loss. Sir William McMahon, who was Prime Minister for a brief period between 1971 and 1972, suffered a similar hearing ailment to mine because he was older than I was, and therefore was not able to have the advantage of the operations that were available for me. It probably affected him to a more significant degree. And quite famously, Billy Hughes, who was Prime Minister of Australia in the time of the First World War, and in fact is by far the longest serving person ever in the Australian Parliament. He was elected in 1901 at the time of Federation. He was in the very first Parliament, and he was still in Parliament when he died in office in 1952, after 51 years in Parliament, and that's only the half of it. The other remarkable thing about Billy Hughes was that when he was first elected, he represented the Labor Party from an area including Balmain in Sydney, and when he died, he was the Liberal member for Bradfield that covered the North Shore of Sydney. Now that was pretty remarkable, and notwithstanding his hearing loss, he was able to achieve it. And somebody once said to him, "Billy, you've been in every party but the Country Party," and his reply was, "Mate, you've got to draw the line somewhere." It's one of Australia's more famous political jokes, and I say that with due apologies to my many Country Party friends who laughed just as uproariously at the joke as the rest of us used to. But Billy Hughes was quite deaf, and there are many photographs of him wearing the hearing aids that proliferated, of course, and with only the larger devices really until the invention of the smaller ones beginning, I think, in the 1970s. So they are some of my own experiences, and I I can't speak too highly of the way in which I was looked after by these three remarkable ear, nose and throat specialists at different stages of my life, and I continue to be greatly assisted by the audiologists and the hearing precision people who have really made things a lot easier for me. Of course, it was difficult in the 1950s. I went to Sydney University between 1957 and 1961. In those days, there was no online lecture material. You really did have to go to lectures, and you had to take copious notes and follow things very closely, or you had to, on occasions, if you didn't hear everything, you had to have a very reliable friend sitting next to you who would allow you to copy his notes. Now, I went through all of those processes. It did make university harder simply because one had to rely more heavily on oral lectures than is the case now. I guess one of the extraordinary things I've noticed in my life, and it's been brought to my attention because of my own situation, just how much more sensitive society is to things that might cause hearing loss. I mean, I can still remember as a child seeing workmen with jackhammers and no earmuffs, and of course anybody in the profession would know of the fact that many people fired artillery pieces not only in World War I but also in World War II, and probably through to the war in Vietnam, in Korea, perhaps not in Vietnam, without having ear protection. As a younger person, I'd mow the lawn, willingly, without any kind of ear protection. Later on, after I had the second operation, Dr. Griswold said to me, "Now you make sure that you, even if you're using a lawnmower, you use earmuffs." Now, all those sorts of things people didn't worry about. They started to worry about them, from my recollection, about in the 1970s, but prior to that we were remarkably, as a society, insensitive to the damage that we're doing. And when one talks about hearing awareness and hearing loss and awareness week, is not only an awareness of what can be done to help people who've had a hearing loss, but also awareness of what we can do in order to prevent people getting hearing loss. And of course the wonderful tests that are available almost immediately a child is born, and my wife and I have two grandsons, and because of my condition, virtually the first thing we asked of first our daughter and then our son when our grandchildren were born was that they had the hearing tests, because I was concerned that it might be carried forward into a future generation. So, ladies and gentlemen, they are just a few thoughts of mine. I hope they're useful. As I emphasise, I've been very lucky. Something could be done about my hearing loss to bring it up to certainly a very useful level of hearing, and I was able to pursue a career in public life for which I feel intensely grateful. Now, that would not have been possible if it hadn't been for those operations. It would not have been possible. It would have become far too difficult, or that my career would have been interrupted for reasons other than unpopularity at various stages. And I am extremely grateful for that, and the least I can do, if just in a small way, is to relate my story, to explain what happened to me, and finally and again to urge all of you and any connected with all of you, please take advantage of what is there, because it is wonderfully better than it used to be, and you'll hear more from the experts, not only how far it's come, but also how far it's going to go in the future. Thank you very much.